Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We are just ramped up this year. 2021 is starting out to be a great year with wonderful guests, lots of feedback, good questions, and I'm excited for spring that's in the air and summertime right around the corner. And I seem to have no shortage of people coming my way that have interesting stories, a lot to offer through their careers and their successes and what they're currently doing. And again, today's no exception to that. I've got Charlie and Maureen on the phone. How are you both today?
We're good.
Yep, great.
You guys are nestled in Palm Springs. I'm sure with spring in the air out there, this is the perfect time of year to be in Palm Springs, right?
Yes, that's why we're here.
Is that your 100% place where you live, or do you have another spot?
Yeah, we just come here for the winters. We live in Park City, Utah.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Well, then you know what winters are like out there. So you both have very eclectic backgrounds and things that you're currently doing. And typically what we like to do is get a little bit of background on each of our guests. So maybe, Maureen, if you can go first, just talk a little bit about your background and where you came from and kind of bring us up to date. And then I'll dig into some hard questions later.
That's a long story. I'm shortening it. I'm a social scientist who's passionate about human flourishing and spent most of my career wandering around because I'm addicted to learning. So I've taught at the university. I've worked in healthcare. I've worked in the corporate setting. That's where I started. But my main passion is to move people from their head to their heart and encourage them to follow their passion and clear out all the conditioning and entrainment and narratives that get in the way of them being their authentic self. And I've had the great opportunity of getting involved in contemplative practices early on and really bringing that passion for the opportunity to bring scalable models to the masses so that people can start to not just focus, but be able to go internally and see their narratives and reactions and stories so they can start to transcend them.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this something that as a child or in your young adult life, something that was inspired by your family, or were you exposed to something through college that you're like, haha, this is my calling?
That was not my family. They think I'm odd. No, I think I've just always been passionate and curious. My dad would say my first word was why. But I had a spontaneous mystical experience when I was 21, and that changed my life. I was supposed to go to law school, and instead I went to graduate school because I was looking for context and really started to explore consciousness, human development, neuroscience, human ecology, psychology, and a lot of modalities that are now more normalized, but back then were cutting edge.
Mm-hmm. I like that you were honest about the fact that your family thinks that you were odd.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people go through that with their parents or their extended relatives or friends, where you're kind of the oddball. What was it that made them feel that way or express that? And was it something you felt you had to overcome, or you just enjoyed being the odd one?
Yeah, I don't know that I knew anything different, right? I was odd from the beginning, and I looked around my family system, who I love dearly. I have 3 siblings and my parents, and I just looked around from a very young age saying, what am I doing here? I don't fit here. And there was a lot of shaming, and there was a lot of, pushing me back or trying to push me back and stop me just because they were scared and they didn't understand. I mean, my big message that was imprinted in me is, who do you think you are? Mm-hmm. That was what, today they're a little more open and receptive, but still think I'm odd.
I'm not asking you to divulge your inner soul on this, but what's interesting, like when I was growing up in my teenage years, I always had my own money. I worked hard, And one of my friends worked at Nordstrom's, and he told me the Nordstrom story. This is in the 80s when Nordstrom's was just kind of getting big, and about the quality of their products and their customer service. And I just fell in love with their whole deal. And so I would buy clothes from Nordstrom's. Well, my family, they thought I was odd. They thought, we're not a family that shops at Nordstrom's. You don't shop at Nordstrom's. You're not that kind of person. And I kind of bucked the system. Now, it's much smaller than having an oddity in terms of my personality and things like that. But, encountering that at a young age and kind of standing your ground, like, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. These are products that I believe in, isn't always the easiest thing to do with your family. And obviously that's something that you had to get through.
Yeah. And I think, I see it as I didn't absorb the conditioning and entrainment and programming that happens in human development. I really questioned it. And I can see with my family, again, lovely people, but they are limited and they are in that programming and conditioning. And so my rising above it and really finding my own path, I mean, I know part of them admires that, but the bigger part of them, it's just too terrifying to do that deep work and move beyond that. It's just simpler and more comfortable to stay in that familiar space. And so, I just said, like saying yes, I said yes to all kinds of opportunities and new ways of thinking, and they just couldn't.
Yeah, it's funny. Maybe this was a common line for you, but I'd tell my family I'm doing something. They look at me, they're like, of course you are, right?
Yeah,
of course you are.
Yes.
And by the way, you'll probably be good at it as they walk away knowing that they would never get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. What area did you grow up in as a child and with your family?
At Janesville, Wisconsin.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of. I don't want to say it makes a lot of sense, but Middle America,
Small town.
Yeah, small town. Yeah, I love it. Charlie, you're not going to get away without telling us some growing up stories and kind of where your initial molding began.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Maureen. We have some similarities. Difference for me is when I said yes to my life, my family said goodbye. So I actually don't interact with them anymore. But I grew up, passionate about transformation, change, authentic leadership, and innovation. And, I started my first business when I was in third or fourth grade. I've had a career that spanned 14 different industries. Some of it's very traditional, like my first job was working on Wall Street during the day, and then I was starting a nonprofit in the slums of Nairobi, Kenya at night. And my career's kind of gone back and forth, like that, where I've worked for some big companies, small companies, startups. And for the last 9 years, I've been working with, as a managing director for a group called the Bridge Builders Collaborative. We've been investing in early startups in the space of sort of mindfulness, consciousness, spirituality, mental health, trying to actually, create a whole new industry, which is developing in that area. And so, I'm passionate about working with other people and working with Maureen, to help create global change, to help provide invitations for humanity to transform.
So you touched on many great topics, but one that stood out, and we do this all the time on the show. You said your first business was when you were in fourth grade? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we got to know what that is. We got entrepreneurs listening here.
Yeah, it was. So my best friend and I started a business where we had lemonade stands, and then we would create like art that we would sell at the lemonade stands, and we had a bank account, and we had a little office, tucked away in the house, and that was just, that was what we did at the time.
It's interesting. 99.9% of all the entrepreneurs I have on this show all had some type of business when they were young, pre-teens, Well, I sold gum in junior high. Like we all had something, and it developed into another thing and another thing. What happened? What other little businesses did you have when you were young?
Well, that was really it. I then went, I went more traditional. The next business that I started was, when I was in my, I think 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I started this nonprofit in the slums of Nairobi. It grew to where, there have been like 4 million people that have been, served healthcare in the slum areas. So I've started nonprofits. I've started for-profits. I started a business in 1998, the first for-profit expedition company in U.S. history to help two women, famous female polar explorers, to become the first women to cross the continent of Antarctica. And we used their expedition as a metaphor to inspire girls and women to ask really the question of this podcast, like, what's yes for me? What if these women can do that, then what do I want to do with my life? So, and now it's fun because I'm using my skills to help, entrepreneurs start their businesses, to help as an investor or a board member. So I'm helping in a different way. So
what inspired you to pick that particular charity or build that particular foundation? Was it a trip over there? Was it some exposure? Was it a TV show? Because, people really have a heart to help others, but they don't know where to start and what to start with. And it seems like there's so many options out there these days because of the internet and media. How did you figure out what you wanted to do?
Well, I'm still asking that question of what, but specific to, to the businesses, with the business in Nairobi, when I graduated from college, I put a backpack on. I worked, odd jobs in remote places around the world. My last job was, as a social worker in the slums of Nairobi. I learned very quickly that I don't like social work, and I'm not very good at it. But I wanted to help create change. And the way that I thought I could do that is more through entrepreneurship and creating a business and a framework to help empower the Kenyan community, to do something, to help their community. So that's when, I started a business and helped develop sort of the products and services and help the management of it. So it really was, having a passion and then knowing how I could use my gifts to shape something that would change the system.
I find it interesting as we travel the world, and I always encourage a younger audience to get out and travel the world and really experience cultures and ways of living, how oftentimes that will stick with us for the rest of our life. I've been going to Baja, Mexico since I was a teenager, but in my mid-20s, it stuck with me, the orphanages down there and the needs. And I've been donating and supporting those orphanages, feels like almost my whole life, so the last almost 30 years. And it's just very compelling to me how these things happen in our lives. And one of the things I like to encourage our listeners to, and maybe you would support this notion, is that if you have the opportunity between college and your career, get out, do that backpack trip, travel the world and understand cultures, because especially as the United States being such a melting pot, to understand where people are coming from and what their values and foundations are really makes us better people in a society as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd take that a step further, maybe to say, if your passion is, art or music or whatever sort of fueling you inside, and you say, oh, I'm not supposed to do this, but I really want to, then, go after that.
Yeah. I think it's important. Maureen, you touched on your life practice that brought you to where you're at today. Tell us a little bit about what your daily business looks like and how you're helping and where you're going with that.
Well, excuse me. It depends upon which day and which time of day.
Well, then how do you divide it up?
Yeah, right. So, Charlie and I work together on Bridge Builders. And I also am a fierce feminist activist. Philanthropically, I do a lot of work around dismantling the patriarchy, which again is part of our conditioning, right? And then I also do a lot of coaching.